All right, buckle up, film fanatics. Tonight we're diving into a cinematic abyss. Martin Scorsese, bless his narrative-loving heart, believes film isn't just entertainment. It's a sacred craft, a storytelling campus where every frame matters. So what happens when movies, well, they just spit in the face of that? These aren't just box office bombs, folks. Oh no, these 15 films didn't just fail to make money, they failed at being cinema. They ignored character, butchered story, and frankly, insulted our intelligence. Tonight, we're exposing the movies that turned Hollywood's silver screen into a scrapyard, and why Marty, the master himself, would probably wish these reels had stayed buried. It's genuinely hard to believe this sequel even exists. Super Baby's Baby Geniuses 2 is often called one of the worst films ever made. And it's not just that the babies talk, it's that they talk in overwritten, exposition-heavy monologues while green-screened into action scenes that would embarrass a college film project. To a visual purist like Scorsese, this film would likely represent everything wrong with digital-era shortcuts. The premise? Hyper-intelligent infants battle an evil media mogul trying to control the minds of the world's children. Sounds wild, right? It is, but not in the fun Looney Tunes way. It's incoherent, poorly paced, and loaded with terrible one-liners delivered by toddlers whose mouths are digitally manipulated like bad animatronics. Watching it feels like staring into the uncanny valley and never coming back. The CGI is so abysmal, it actively distracts from the scenes. Characters appear superimposed into environments with lighting that doesn't match and shadows that don't exist. And yet, this film cost nearly $20 million to make. That's not just poor budgeting, it's a betrayal of artistic integrity. Scorsese, who labors over lighting and camera angles for months, would likely recoil at such carelessness. Even more disturbing is the film's complete misunderstanding of what makes family films resonate. Instead of charm or emotion, Super Babies relies on garish visuals and toilet humor. It doesn't respect its audience, young or old. And for Scorsese, that's the greatest sin of all. Because great cinema respects its viewer. It doesn't pander, it challenges, entertains, or enlightens. Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2 does none of these things. It doesn't even try.
Few films have been so universally reviled as Dirty Love, written by and starring Jenny McCarthy. It's a romantic comedy that scorches the genre with grotesque humor and a script so disjointed it borders on cinematic sabotage. While Scorsese reveres cinema as a sacred craft, one where the camera becomes a brush and story the canvas, Dirty Love is more like a food fight in the museum. It's vulgarity without wit, chaos without charm. From the very start, the film seems determined to repel. We meet Rebecca, a heartbroken photographer who embarks on a series of humiliating romantic encounters after finding her boyfriend cheating. What could have been a quirky journey of self-discovery turns into a parade of bodily function gags, public shaming, and overacted absurdities that feel more like an audition tape for a reality show than a scripted narrative. One of the film's most infamous scenes involves a period mishap in a grocery store, filmed with such aggressive lack of taste that it drew walkouts during early screenings. Roger Ebert famously gave it 0 stars, calling it a plumbing accident of a movie. If Scorsese had seen it, he might have quoted the Book of Job, "Why was I born to suffer this?" But the real crime with Dirty Love is its utter disregard for emotional truth. Comedy, at its best, comes from vulnerability and honesty, two pillars Scorsese builds into even his darkest characters. Dirty Love mocks those values. Instead of catharsis, it offers contempt. Instead of character arcs, it offers scream fests and stunt gags. Cinema, to Scorsese, should reflect the soul of its creator. Dirty Love doesn't reflect anything but desperation. It weaponizes shame and shock in place of storytelling. And that, more than its crudeness or poor direction, is why it belongs in the vault of shame.
At its surface, Bratz is a teen musical about friendship and self-expression. Underneath, it's a hollow corporate billboard disguised as empowerment. Based on the toy line, the film tries to sell a story of individuality, but ends up promoting uniform materialism, drenched in glitter and painfully generic pop songs. To Scorsese, who sees cinema as personal expression, not product placement, Bratz would feel like an insult to the very concept of film as art. The story follows 4 best friends who try to navigate high school cliques while maintaining their unique identities. A noble idea, truly, but the execution is tone-deaf. Dialogue reads like it was AI-generated to target tween focus groups. And the plot? It's stitched together with cliches. The evil head cheerleader, the food fight rebellion, the surprise talent show finale. There's no originality, no character depth, just a string of moments designed to sell merchandise. What's most heartbreaking is the film's attempt to masquerade as empowerment. It throws in a few diversity checkboxes and platitudes like, be yourself, while showcasing a universe where self-worth is measured by fashion accessories and flawless makeup. Unlike the coming-of-age realism in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, this movie doesn't reflect teenage struggle. It repackages it into plastic dreams. There's no truth, only gloss. To Scorsese, this wouldn't just be a failure in storytelling, it would be a cultural betrayal. He's spoken often about how cinema should reflect lived experiences. Bratz does the opposite. It's a toy commercial masquerading as a life lesson, and its hollow center shows in every glitter-covered frame.
Starring Paris Hilton and marketed as a romantic comedy, The Hottie and the Naughty feels like a mean-spirited joke that somehow made it into theaters. It's not just bad, it's cruel. A film that hinges its entire plot on a woman's physical transformation, suggesting beauty is the only path to love, would be anathema to a humanist like Scorsese. This film doesn't just lack taste, it lacks heart. The premise is disturbingly simple. A man wants to date Christabel, the hottie. But to do so, he must also find a suitor for her unattractive best friend, the naughty. What follows is a cringe fest of shallow romance, plastic characters, and grotesque makeup effects meant to make us recoil from the naughty character. Until, of course, she becomes beautiful and worthy of love. Scorsese's films treat all characters, flawed or not, as human beings with depth. In contrast, The Hottie and the Naughty reduces women to their physical appearance and men to mindless pursuers. It's a film made without empathy, humor, or truth. Every scene feels engineered to insult your intelligence and lower your expectations for what cinema can do. Critics called it offensive, stupid, and void of charm, and they weren't exaggerating. The film fails every standard of good filmmaking. No character growth, no believable emotion, and a script that reads like a rejected sitcom pilot. What's worse, it seems proud of its own nastiness, as if cruelty is comedy. Scorsese believes in moral ambiguity and truth. This movie offers neither. It's a world where kindness and self-worth are meaningless without physical attractiveness. It's a cinematic nightmare wrapped in pink packaging, and one of the clearest examples of how not to make a film with soul.
When parody dies, it's because of movies like Disaster Movie, directed by Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer. This film tries to spoof popular culture and action films, but ends up becoming an unwatchable montage of lazy references and endless fart jokes. To a director like Scorsese, who believes in layered satire and earned laughs, Disaster Movie would feel like a slap in the face to the genre itself. There's no plot, just a random collection of scenes featuring actors dressed like pop icons. Hannah Montana gets crushed by a meteor, a Sex and the City parody slips on banana peels, and Iron Man dances the hip-hop. These aren't jokes, they're just recognizable costumes flailing on screen. There's no punchline, no insight, no perspective. It's like watching someone read headlines and make fart noises. The editing is dizzying and incoherent. Characters enter and exit with no explanation. The pacing is breakneck yet mind-numbing, and the dialogue consists of pop culture buzzwords stitched together with groans. It doesn't mock disaster films, it mocks the audience for showing up. Every gag feels like it was conceived in 5 seconds and shot in 2. Scorsese's work respects structure, rhythm, and audience intelligence. Disaster Movie ignores all of that. It assumes audiences are so dumb they'll laugh just because someone says High School Musical. There's no originality, no cinematic craftsmanship, and absolutely no joy in the performances. It's empty noise, a commercial masquerading as a script. If film is supposed to be a dialogue with the audience, this one is a shouted insult. And for a filmmaker who sees cinema as sacred communion, Disaster Movie is the heretic in the church.
Based on the best-selling Christian novels by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, Left Behind had the opportunity to explore deep theological questions through a character-driven narrative. Instead, it delivered a flight safety video with CGI explosions, Nicolas Cage in autopilot mode, and all the emotional depth of a pamphlet. To Martin Scorsese, a man of faith himself and director of Silence, this film is a disgrace to religious storytelling. The plot? The rapture occurs mid-flight, leaving Cage's character, a pilot, to land the plane while the world descends into chaos. It's a premise that could carry intensity, urgency, and spiritual reckoning. Instead, what we get are blank stares, cheap green screen effects, and an awkward script that sounds like it was assembled by committee. The first 45 minutes of the film offer little more than bland exposition and stilted dialogue about coffee preferences. What's most heartbreaking is how Left Behind trivializes its own message. Whereas Scorsese's religious films are slow, reflective meditations, this movie turns The End of Days into a second-rate action flick. There's no sense of grief, awe, or transformation, only stock reactions and frantic pacing. Characters respond to global catastrophe with the emotional intensity of someone losing cell phone signal. For a movie about salvation, it feels utterly soulless. Scorsese's often emphasized that cinema should illuminate the human condition, especially when it deals with faith. But Left Behind turns its spiritual backbone into a toy, using the rapture as a gimmick rather than an existential dilemma. It reduces the sacred into spectacle and turns belief into a prop for disaster movie tropes. In Scorsese's view, this isn't just bad cinema, it's a moral failure. Because when film has the opportunity to probe the mysteries of the soul, but settles for noise and CGI, it's not just disappointing, it's unforgivable.
If chaos had a film editor, it might resemble Movie 43. This star-studded anthology promised edgy humor but delivered something closer to cinematic whiplash. With directors like Peter Farrelly and a cast including Hugh Jackman, Kate Winslet, and Halle Berry, expectations were sky-high. But Movie 43 stitched together raunchy, disjointed sketches that confused vulgarity for comedy. Martin Scorsese, who champions coherent narrative arcs and emotional depth, would likely find this film a violation of everything sacred in storytelling. Scorsese has long said cinema should elevate the human spirit or challenge it. Movie 43 does neither. Instead, it drags audiences through skits involving testicles on necks, offensive stereotypes, and body function gags that feel like they were written by a high schooler trying too hard to shock. Its structure mocks the anthology format, offering no through line, just a string of embarrassing A-listers in regrettable performances. What's most tragic is how much talent was wasted. Emma Stone, Richard Gere, Naomi Watts, all reduced to delivering lines that feel more like dares than dialogue. There's no narrative purpose, no emotional resonance, just an ugly attempt at provocation. It's exactly the kind of film Scorsese might see as contributing to the death of cinema, entertainment reduced to lowest common denominator schlock. In an era where streaming content dilutes standards, Movie 43 represents everything Scorsese warns us about. It's not just bad, it's irresponsible. It weaponizes celebrity appeal and turns it into a punchline factory. The result? A cinematic abomination that should have never left the cutting room floor.
Martin Scorsese crafted Goodfellas with an intricate understanding of criminal psychology, the seduction of power, and the tragedy of hubris. In contrast, Gotti, starring John Travolta, feels like a parody of that vision. Instead of insight, it offers shallow tough guy posturing. It wants to be Scarface, but ends up like a mobster-themed high school play. The real tragedy? It thinks it's serious cinema. Gotti's narrative jumps back and forth in time like a broken record. One minute we're in the courtroom, the next we're watching a bad wig montage. There's no sense of momentum, no character evolution, just Travolta growling in various suits. Scorsese, who believes in character development through conflict, would balk at the lifeless storytelling on display here. Critics slammed Gotti for its choppy editing and inconsistent tone, but the most damning flaw is its glorification of violence. While Scorsese's gangster films are cautionary tales, Gotti feels like a recruitment ad for organized crime. It rewrites history to sanitize a violent legacy, turning a mob boss into a misunderstood hero. That's not subversive, it's irresponsible. In the end, Gotti fails on every level Scorsese champions: story authenticity, moral complexity, and cinematic rhythm. It's a cautionary tale, not about crime, but about what happens when a film confuses myth with truth. Mike Myers built a comedy empire on unforgettable characters like Austin Powers and Wayne Campbell. But with The Love Guru, he crashed that empire straight into the Himalayas. A film so tone-deaf, so drenched in cringeworthy stereotypes, it felt like an SNL skit that never ended. For Scorsese, who believes in storytelling rooted in authenticity, The Love Guru would feel like a betrayal to the craft. From the very first frame, the movie telegraphs its desperation. Myers plays Guru Pitka, an American raised in India who dispenses nonsensical mantras and awkward pelvic jokes in equal measure. The character lacks humanity, humility, and coherence, relying solely on tired cultural jokes that alienate more than amuse. Even the supporting cast, Jessica Alba, Justin Timberlake, Ben Kingsley, can't rescue the spiritual mess. The film confuses cultural appropriation with humor and storytelling with spectacle. Every scene screams, "Please laugh!" and the silence from the audience is deafening. There's no tension, no arc, no reason to care. Just puns, gags, and spiritual cliches stapled together with glitter and glue. Scorsese is often criticized superficial filmmaking. To him, cinema is sacred, a reflection of humanity's deepest truths. The Love Guru is the opposite. A film devoid of soul, tone-deaf in every frame, and executed with the grace of a slapstick hammer. If cinema is a religion, The Love Guru is blasphemy. On paper, 50 Shades of Grey promised sensual exploration and psychological intrigue. In execution, it offered awkward dialogue, blank performances, and a bafflingly sanitized portrayal of BDSM. For Scorsese, whose films often explore obsession, power, and emotional manipulation with unflinching depth, this movie would likely represent everything shallow about modern franchise cinema. It confuses dominance with abuse and intimacy with glamour. The film centers on Christian Grey, a billionaire with a dark secret, and Anastasia Steele, the innocent student who falls for him. But instead of emotional complexity, we get a relationship built on coercion, coldness, and zero character development. Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan appear emotionally detached, delivering lines with the intensity of a sleep aid commercial. Scorsese, who demands emotional honesty from every performance, would likely view this as a betrayal of character-driven drama. Worse, the film misrepresents BDSM culture in a way that damages real understanding. It presents Christian as a traumatized control freak whose abusive behavior is romanticized rather than examined. It skips over consent and trust, two cornerstones of the real BDSM community, and instead glamorizes isolation, stalking, and manipulation. In Scorsese's cinematic world, these dynamics would be deconstructed. Here, they're packaged as Valentine's Day material. Despite its box office success, 50 Shades is a sterile, emotionally vacant film that mistakes softcore gloss for storytelling. Its cultural impact is undeniable, but its artistic merit virtually non-existent. It's a textbook case of how Hollywood can take taboo themes and neuter them for mass consumption. And that, to Scorsese, is the greatest perversion of all. On paper, 50 Shades of Grey promised sensual exploration and psychological intrigue. In execution, it offered awkward dialogue, blank performances, and a bafflingly sanitized portrayal of BDSM. For Scorsese, whose films often explore obsession, power, and emotional manipulation with unflinching depth, this movie would likely represent everything shallow about modern franchise cinema. It confuses dominance with abuse and intimacy with glamour. The film centers on Christian Grey, a billionaire with a dark secret, and Anastasia Steele, the innocent student who falls for him. But instead of emotional complexity, we get a relationship built on coercion, coldness, and zero character development. Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan appear emotionally detached, delivering lines with the intensity of a sleep aid commercial. Scorsese, who demands emotional honesty from every performance, would likely view this as a betrayal of character-driven drama. Worse, the film misrepresents BDSM culture in a way that damages real understanding. It presents Christian as a traumatized control freak whose abusive behavior is romanticized rather than examined. It skips over consent and trust, two cornerstones of the real BDSM community, and instead glamorizes isolation, stalking, and manipulation. In Scorsese's cinematic world, these dynamics would be deconstructed. Here, they're packaged as Valentine's Day material. Despite its box office success, 50 Shades is a sterile, emotionally vacant film that mistakes softcore gloss for storytelling. Its cultural impact is undeniable, but its artistic merit virtually non-existent. It's a textbook case of how Hollywood can take taboo themes and neuter them for mass consumption. And that, to Scorsese, is the greatest perversion of all.
Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly are comedy royalty when the script works. But in Holmes and Watson, they're trapped in a mystery nobody wants to solve. This slapstick take on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's iconic detective duo turns cleverness into chaos. Scorsese, who reveres historical texture and character depth, would find this film not just unfunny, but offensive to the legacy of literary and cinematic craftsmanship. The plot, such as it is, revolves around Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson trying to stop a murder plot against Queen Victoria. Instead of deductive brilliance, we get vomiting scenes, slapstick involving bees, and lines like "No shit, Sherlock" repeated until the audience loses the will to live. Riley tries his best, but even his charm can't salvage a script that seems written during a sugar crash. Scorsese has expressed disdain for modern films that pander to the lowest denominator, and Holmes & Watson embodies that fear. It confuses randomness with humor and parody with disrespect. It mocks the very source material it's based on, not out of clever irreverence, but from a complete lack of understanding. There's no clever play on mystery tropes, no ironic commentary, just laziness in Victorian drag. Sony pulled the film from award season screenings. Audiences reportedly walked out in droves. Critics compared it to cinematic waterboarding. For a director like Scorsese who can revere a genre when handled with care, Shutter Island is a love letter to noir. Holmes & Watson is worse than a failure. It's a missed opportunity to honor a rich tradition of detective storytelling.
Animated films can reach the soul, as Pixar and Studio Ghibli have proven time and again, but Norm of the North is the exception that proves the rule. Not all animation is art. With its lazy design, cliched plot, and humor that feels test-marketed to toddlers, it's a hollow, consumer-driven product that would send Scorsese running. It's animation without emotion, visuals without vision. The film follows Norm, a polar bear who travels to New York to stop a real estate developer from building condos in the Arctic. The environmental message is watered down by constant dancing, twerking, and fart jokes. Worse, Norm is voiced by Rob Schneider in a performance so flat it makes Siri sound soulful. Scorsese, who uses voice with such precise emotional calibration, Goodfellas' narration being iconic, would see this as a betrayal of storytelling through sound. The animation is low budget and painfully generic. Characters lack texture, fluidity, or design originality. It's as if the studio copied other films and removed all the charm. The lemming sidekicks are a particularly grating element, high-pitched, useless, and designed solely for merchandising. Even the color grading looks like it was dipped in dishwater. What truly sinks Norm of the North is its complete lack of sincerity. It doesn't believe in its message, its characters, or its story. Everything is a placeholder, a line, a joke, a plot beat. And Scorsese, who believes cinema must come from the heart, would see Norm as proof that the medium is in danger when the heart is removed.
M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender wasn't just a bad adaptation, it was a betrayal of a beloved universe. Based on the critically acclaimed Avatar, The Last Airbender series, the film whitewashed characters, stripped away the humor, and butchered the plot into a grim, lifeless procession of exposition. For Scorsese, who believes in honoring the soul of a story, this film would be sacrilege. The pacing is disastrous. Instead of flowing like the series, the movie rushes through major events with robotic narration and flat dialogue. The elemental bending, a visual spectacle in the show, is reduced to awkward choreography and cheap CGI. There's no weight, no power, just pixelated gestures and long silences. The film's mispronunciation of character names only added salt to the wound for fans. Scorsese's films breathe with lived-in authenticity. The Last Airbender suffocates under its own weight. The performances are wooden, the world-building feels like cardboard, and the tone is humorless, stripping away the joy and wisdom that made the original so profound. Shyamalan's direction lacks the personal touch Scorsese champions. It feels more like a contract obligation than a passion project. Worse still is the racial controversy. Characters of color in the series were replaced with white actors, turning a multicultural narrative into a whitewashed spectacle. For a filmmaker like Scorsese, who has often confronted societal prejudice head-on, this decision would feel like an ethical and artistic betrayal. A film that had the opportunity to elevate cultural diversity instead flattened it for studio comfort.
Eddie Murphy has given us timeless performances. Coming to America, Beverly Hills Cop, Dreamgirls. But 1,000 Words is a masterclass in misfire. It's a film where Murphy plays a man cursed to lose one leaf from a magical tree for every word he speaks, until all leaves fall and he dies. Instead of clever restraint, the film drowns in cliches, melodrama, and forced lessons. Scorsese, who sees silence as a powerful cinematic tool, would find this film's use of it superficial and misguided. The premise could have offered real introspection. What does it mean to communicate, to connect without words? But 1,000 Words never asks those questions. It throws in slapstick scenes, hollow emotional beats, and one-dimensional supporting characters. Murphy, usually vibrant, is muted, not by design, but by a script that has no idea what to do with him. His expressions are reduced to mugging and pratfalls. The direction is uninspired, the pacing disjointed, and the tonal shifts jarring. One moment we're meant to laugh, the next we're supposed to cry, but the transitions are so clumsy we feel nothing. There's no catharsis, just confusion. And the magical tree gimmick, which could symbolize spiritual growth or loss, becomes just another ticking clock. Scorsese often speaks about truth in performance. Here, Murphy is suffocated by a plot device and a lifeless screenplay. There's no emotional truth, only noise pretending to be silence. And that's what makes 1,000 Words not just a bad movie, but a hollow one, empty of purpose, meaning, and soul.
So there you have it, folks. 15 films that in their own unique ways missed the mark, ignored the essence of storytelling, and ultimately prove that even with big budgets and big names, a film without soul is just, well, a scrap heap. What do you think? Have you suffered through any of these cinematic missteps? Or do you have your own contenders for Scorsese's scrapyard? Let us know.